Well, hello, everybody. I'm Gary London, Senior Principal with London Motor Advisors, and my special guest today to solve the problems of the world is Tony Manolatos. And Tony and I have had a pretty long association now. We've done a number of projects together and a campaign or two. Tony's in the sort of media, politics, community relations space, and whenever our projects require his and his associates' skills relating to telling the community or telling the politicians or telling the voters what we need to express to them to get our projects to the next step or to approval. We bring Tony in to do all that work and to coordinate that work. So I'm going to let you sort of tell us a little bit more in detail about who you are, Tony, and we'll jump into it. Good morning.
Good morning, Gary. Boy, that was a very warm introduction. Thank you very much. I got to take you to more places. So yeah, Tony Manolatos with Manolatos Public Affairs. Public affairs is sort of what you would think. It's a broad umbrella. There's a lot of compartments that fall underneath public affairs: community engagement, government relations, media relations. And what it all really boils down to, Gary, is strategic communications and making sure that our clients are reaching the audiences. And sometimes those audiences are very narrow. Sometimes those audiences just could be, the 9 city council members, but making sure they're reaching them with the messages that they want to be conveying and reaching them where they are, right? And a lot of times they're online. So we can get into that and sort of the marketing component of things later. A little bit about me. So I came up in this crazy business. I came up in the newspaper lane. I was a newspaper reporter for a long, long time. Really enjoyed it. Spent 13 years in the profession, the last 4 or 5 as an investigative reporter, before there was social media and iPhones. And so I got to spend a lot of time looking into things and investigating things and then boiling and distilling those things down and explaining them to readers. And those skills, I think, served me well in my public affairs role. But then I left the newspaper business and I went and worked at San Diego City Hall for then council member Kevin Faulkner. You may have heard of him, Gary. And when you're a newspaper reporter, you kind of think that you know everything, right? Especially if you're sort of at the top of your game, you're an investigative reporter. Well, then you go over to City Hall and you kind of realize you don't know too much. So I worked at City Hall for a couple of years, and that really helped me understand how things work politically, with land use, government. It opened up a lot of doors for me, really expanded my network. So without that experience, coupled with my newspaper experience, I don't think I'd be a very effective public affairs professional. But because I was in both of those lanes for many years, I'm able to do what I do now fairly effectively.
It's so interesting because you do exactly what I hate to do and what I have avoided with the passion. When we do our economic dirt kicking here at London Motor, we're doing market studies and feasibility studies, and we're writing our reports, and we're avoiding public input and any stresses relating to the neighborhoods or the communities or the politics of it all, with a passion, because the test that we have to pass or that we have to help our clients pass is the test of feasibility. Will the project work? But what you do is you go beyond, does the project make money, which is sort of another way of saying, will the project work? And how is the best way for the project to go forward? And then you step in, and your job is to convince whoever needs convincing that who don't care about whether it makes money.
Yeah, that it's a good project put together by a good team, an experienced team that's really going to be an asset to the community, right? We shift into sales and marketing and communication, and
Yeah.
with projects, Sometimes it's a narrow audience that you need to speak to. Sometimes it's a real broad audience. Sometimes, Gary, I get involved in crisis communication situations that don't necessarily involve an entitlement project, but there's a brand or there's a individual or a company or a nonprofit that's found themselves in some hot water that the media's writing about them every day, and you know, they sometimes the strategy there. And quite honestly, in other areas of public relations, sometimes less is more. So it just sort of depends on the circumstances. We're not always out there beating the drum and trying to rally support. I think the most important thing, Gary, is being smart and strategic at the forefront. Really understanding what the client's goals are. What does success look like? And then building a strategy or strategies and then tactics around those goals. Because a lot of times you get involved in these situations and a client wants you to like fire off a press release and get that op-ed in the paper, and they want all that to happen yesterday. And it's really important, I think, to sort of step back and spend some time, get you and people like you, get the team in the room, really understand what the goals are, not just from a communication standpoint, but what are the project goals? What do we want to achieve here? And then you build strategies and tactics that'll get you there.
Give me some examples of projects, perhaps both big and small, that you worked on the last few years, so we can sort of give everybody context here.
Sure. So I do like you. I spend a lot of time in the land use arena. I work with developers, for-profit and nonprofit developers. The San Diego County Building Industry Association is a longtime client of mine. But that's not the only arena that I spend time in. I do work with government agencies. I do work with nonprofits. I do work with businesses. San Diego Unified has been a longtime client of mine. And, you wear different hats when you need to. I had never stood up a summer school program, but when we were emerging from COVID, San Diego Unified, like a lot of school districts, received a lot of federal grant money to help these kids help them get back up to speed before the fall semester started. Normally in summer school, you get a handful of, a few thousand kids that are enrolled in summer school. We set up a program. San Diego Unified partnered with the San Diego Foundation. So there was schoolwork in the morning for a couple hours, and then there were these great nonprofit programs, guitar lessons, surfing lessons for a couple hours after the schoolwork, to really get these kids out of their homes and out of this COVID learning environment. There was over 30-some thousand kids enrolled in this program. And it was the first ever of its kind. And it was called Level Up SD, a summer of learning and joy. And we started from scratch. We built the whole program from ground zero. The website, the branding, the communication, the curriculum. I obviously didn't have a hand in the curriculum. I was involved in all of the marketing, the communications. My team built that website where parents could, log on and try and, enroll, not try and it was a wonder. It was one of the most rewarding things I think I've ever been involved in, because it helps so many kids and families in need. And we did it in 2 months. So that comes to mind. You and I have worked on some small land use projects. We've worked on some large land use projects. Generally, when I get involved in a land use issue, it's for a developer who wants to build something, generally homes. And it's not easy, as you know, Gary. It's not easy to build anywhere in San Diego County.
Or anywhere in Southern California, for that matter.
It's not easy to build anywhere in Southern California, correct?
And
Correct.
so, well, I mean, that leads to the question, you've been in this business for a long time. I've been in the business even longer. And give me some sense of perspective, what has changed in your business and in terms of the messages that you have to put out, and just the overall approach to your business between today and when you were doing this a decade or even 2 decades ago?
The media landscape has really shrunk, right? I mean, when I landed in town in 2005, I think there was hundreds and hundreds of, I think there was 400 of us over at the Union Tribune. I think there's 70 now, right? And that's happened everywhere. So we had, as public affairs professionals, we had to adjust. We couldn't just rely on the media to share our story. It's still an important piece of the puzzle, that third-party credibility, a newspaper or a radio station or a TV station writing about you, telling both sides of the story. A good story will be balanced. That's still important, but boy, it's just one small tool in the toolbox. We have to meet people where they are. And unfortunately for the Union Tribune and others like it, they're not always reading the Union Tribune, right? So
how are people getting their, how are you, well, let me put it this way. How do you get the message across today versus the earlier part of the century, given the change, the compression of the media landscape, I guess is what you're speaking to?
Absolutely, it's a challenge, right? It's not just the compression, right? But there's so much information now out there, right? That
Misinformation.
There's a lot of
And
misinformation.
I guess that's my point, is that in the land use space, there's a lot of groups that can just crop up instantly. This goes across all of politics and,
Right.
conspiracy theories and everything else, but in land use, it's really no different. If, inevitably, when we're proposing a project and it's in a neighborhood or near a neighborhood, there's going to be pushback because it involves change. And then a group forms, and it forms almost instantaneously. And it's a non-edited sort of group. They put up a website, they put up a Facebook page, they call a meeting. All of a sudden, you've got a constituency. And the question becomes, whether they have, legitimate standing or not, whether it's just one guy or a real community or effort or what have you. How do you deal with that?
Well, you work for good clients that you believe in, first and foremost, right? Who are going to do the right things. And you engaged early and often. You spend less time, especially, remember what we talked about at the forefront of like worrying about the press release, and you spend more time thinking thoughtfully about, okay, this is going to get out, or it just got out. And we know, for example, that there's this community group out there that's formed or forming that is more than likely going to be a problem. Well, the best thing to do is to reach out to that group, reach out to those folks. Don't wait.
Do you reach out before the project is announced or after it's announced?
Before. Nobody likes being surprised, right? So what you want to do is you want to identify where you're going to have problems, and then you want to go and try and solve those problems. You're not going to win all those people over, but you probably will neutralize them. I mean, in other words, they're never probably going to become cheerleaders for your project, but they may not like blow it up, right?
Well, do they become, is the goal for them to become neutralized or for them to become co-authors?
No, that you really want them to just, the primary goal is to neutralize that criticism. So if you can turn them into supporters and cheerleaders, hey, that's a home run. But really what you're aiming for, what you want to do is you want to neutralize them. You want them to trust what you're saying. You want them to not necessarily become an extension of your team. Boy, that would be a home run, right? Where they're out there advocating for the project. But you want them to be, they're going to be in the community. They're going to be talking. They're going to be vocal. They'll be talking to the media. And so you want them to convey like, look, I've talked to these guys. I don't like everything they're doing, but they're honest brokers. We can work with them. In fact, we are working with them. We're telling them what we want to see out of this project. And so that's the goal.
See, this is what's so frustrating to me, because I regard literally all the projects that we work on as good projects. Otherwise, I wouldn't be involved in it. I would just
Right.
take a pass. And I regard community development and the changes as almost always being positive. And it just bothers me to the core that when we get the pushback for people that use things like oh, we want to preserve our traditional neighborhoods, when traditional really means we want to preserve the neighborhood that we moved into, but we don't, beyond that, we don't really care about this neighborhood. And we get that a lot. And that's what frustrates me, and frankly, why I'm not in the business.
Community character is one you hear a lot, right? We want to preserve our community character. Yeah. Um, the biggest one generally, Gary, as you know, is usually traffic. That usually what drives a lot of the fire from the opposition.
Yeah.
People don't.
And that happens, and usually in my experience, the pushback is uninformed. I'll give you an example. We worked on one Paseo project in a community called Carmel Valley, which
Right.
had huge community opposition.
Right.
And you're right, traffic was a big issue there. Well, we did economic studies and feasibility studies that irrevocably communicated or resulted in the fact that if we build this project as a big commercial element of a mixed use project, we would reduce the traffic counts because people didn't have to leave the community to go somewhere else. They could go right into the community. They could shop and office right in the community. That message just didn't get out there. And I don't know that you were involved in that one or not. But the point is that ultimately the project got severely sized down and compromised because we couldn't get the traffic argument out there. Yet we had the right argument. We just couldn't persuade.
Yeah, that's tough. It's tough. And you're right that, ultimately sometimes you have to, bend, but not break.
Yeah.
And, I mean,
And a lot of times we get involved in projects, I know you do too, where the understanding of that project is based from a community's perspective on this is how it's always been. And what we're doing is we're promoting change and betterment. And again, that goes to traffic and parking and obviously new buildings and those kinds of things. And people are resistant just from their own DNA. This is who we are as Homo sapiens, to change. And so I guess the question is, what are the techniques? What are the tools that you use to deal with the fact that, yeah, it's going to be different, but it could be a better different?
absolutely. Look, like I said, I think it's early and honest engagement, right? That's sustained. I think it's coalition building. And these are tactics that, not everyone uses, but they're important and they take time, right? It takes time to build a coalition of support, but it's very important. And not just leaders at City Hall on your side, but people in the community need to be a part of that coalition. So when this comes up at the soccer game, it's not 9 versus 10. Every nine people saying negative things and one person saying, "Oh, well, I actually kind of like that project." So coalition building is very important. Sort of the traditional marketing techniques, tactics are important. Digital, making sure you have a good digital presence, making sure that you have good earned media relations. There isn't a lot of reporters like we talked about, but make sure that they understand your project and they're writing about it fairly and accurately. It's all of those things. And it's a repetitive process. They say in marketing, Gary, that in order to change someone's mind, in order to persuade someone, you need to reach them at least 4 times over different platforms with messages that work. And so that's another thing, that's another element of this, right? So you and I work on these projects that are super complex and they involve all kinds of wonderful things. You and I, for example, have been involved at different times on the sports arena project. Talk about a massive undertaking that could potentially really change not just that area, but the entire Midway district. That involves all types of bells and whistles and public benefits and opportunities and controversies. But what are the 1 or 2 or probably no more than 3 things that are really going to matter to people. You need to identify those right away, early on, before you go out there and start talking about the project. Because they might not want that amphitheater, even though it's going to go in, because they're worried about the traffic.
Yeah.
So we're not, you know what I mean?
Yeah, it's interesting. That's a really interesting example because I think that that whole Midway district in San Diego, and for those of you who are listening, watching that are not in San Diego, this is kind of the armpit of San Diego. This is a community that is just a hodgepodge of everything. It's a mess in terms of uses, a mess in terms of traffic, a mess in terms of homeless, and yet it's sort of in between an affluent Mission Hills community, tourism areas like Old Town, near downtown, near affluent residential like Point Loma. It's right in the middle of Liberty Station is right there, which is big parks and shopping and recreation. It's right in the middle of everything. Yet there was and continues to be major pushback on that project from the community. And one of the things that they cite is traffic. This new projects, 4,000 new housing units, sports, that's going to create more traffic, as if the developer and the city and so forth aren't going to come up with plans and new infrastructure and new ingress and egress and so forth to address it. It's like assume that like the developer and the city is going to screw up. How do you deal with that?
We don't bury your head in the sand, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, again, it's spending time understanding what it is that what matters to these folks. Maybe it is traffic, and generally that's one of the things that matters. So let's get out there early and often and talk about traffic and talk about how we're going to address that problem. Rather than sort of avoiding it and acting like, oh, it's not a big deal, we've got that covered. We want to really focus on these great, this great park that we're going to give you. Well, maybe they don't want it. So we need to do some really good research early on in the field to understand what it is that people care about.
Yeah, I think that a large part of this also, and this resonates from what you said earlier, is just to be honest with people. I mean, obviously we're talking about change. It's all about change. If we're going to create higher and denser and new, your community is going to look different and it's going to work differently. And that isn't a negative. That's a positive. There seems to be sort of this sentiment on the part of people in communities that change is going to be a negative. And I think change is a positive. I think when we're building more housing and better housing, when we're building better shopping, when we're building better mixed use projects, I think these are all assets to communities, and they're necessary for communities to be viable. And I don't mean this as a dig,
right? No, to grow jobs and have good schools and all that stuff is related to development.
Yeah, here's my dig. I mean, you come from Detroit. The good news is that the Lions are doing really well this year. The bad news is that Detroit is a very troubled metropolitan area and has been for years because they've lost their economic base. And the problems that they face in terms of trying to basically attract the population and the economy back into that metropolitan area are far more complicated than the problems that we've historically faced in San Diego, which is sort of how do we deal with sort of the externalities of growth and development and change and newness. And so in a sense, it's not only a more provocative problem, but sort of an easier problem to address. But it is hard to convince people that we have to have new development and change in order to be dynamic and continue to be a growing, prosperous community as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. Detroit never diversified its economy, as you know, and just put too many eggs in that auto industry basket, and that's been a problem for a long time for Detroit. They have done better of late, but I will tell you that the housing market in Detroit is, I think it's healthier than in San Diego. You can actually build and entitle. Yeah, less expensive. You can build, you can entitle projects. The homelessness problem in Detroit isn't as severe as it is in Southern California because there's more housing stock.
Yeah. We may be facing a different kind of problem going forward in San Diego. I mean, Sandegs and the state's projections are pretty clear in that the growth in our population, the rate of growth is going way down for a variety of reasons, but it all sort of circles back to cost of living, which means housing costs.
Yeah.
And that's a bug that's going to bite our economy at some point. Probably already is, but it's not making the headlines yet. In other words, if people can't afford here, if employees can't afford to live here, then companies can't afford to be here, or at least not expand here. We're sort of seeing the play out of that slowly now, and the projections suggest that that play out is going to continue. So we may be revisiting this, not to the extent of Detroit, but we may be revisiting this issue of what is San Diego, what is Southern California. Going
No, you make a very good point, Gary. I didn't mean to cut you off, but it is difficult for some companies to attract talent in San Diego because of the high housing costs.
Yeah, and well, or to retain. I mean, I always note to people that Qualcomm, our biggest single legitimate private sector employer, is a company that still is big in their presence in San Diego, really hasn't changed, but their expansion hasn't been here. Their expansion has been, to Texas or to India or to other places. And that story can be told elsewhere, with the exception of the high technology companies that have expanded here, like Apple made a big announcement a couple of years ago where they're adding 5,000 or more people into San Diego. What's the reason for that? Pretty simple. Silicon Valley is more expensive than San Diego.
Right. One of the few places.
But at some point, we're going to catch up. In other words, this is, or maybe not so catch up with Silicon Valley. Hopefully we don't in terms of housing costs, but we're going to be so high that that sort of enticement goes away, and maybe Austin becomes a place as it has been for a lot of other companies. So that's an issue.
I mean, you make some excellent points. I mean, I'll just for the listeners here. I mean, the average home in San Diego sells for $900,000. That's a lot of money. You have kids. I have kids. I think our kids will be fine in college and even in their 20s because they can put 5, 6 in an apartment. But I think in their 30s, Gary, if we don't solve this housing crisis, we're going to see our kids moving to Texas and Montana if they want to some land, or back Chicago, or and that's not good for community.
You and I met. I think we met, or at least we started doing business together when you were running the political campaign involving housing in the unincorporated areas and the proposition associated with that. Tell us about that experience.
Good. Right, good memory. And not too long. It was a few years ago. There was a ballot measure that came up from some folks who wanted basically no growth in the unincorporated areas of the county. And they put a countywide ballot measure together, and it essentially, if it had passed, it would have basically stopped any new home developments. I'm probably overstating that, but it was going to be a problem for housing.
The irony was you won. You put on a
did.
very successful campaign. I helped a little bit. You won. You brought me in to help on the substantive side. I mean,
No, you were great. You were great.
made a few speeches, but you did that deal and you won. But to this date, we still haven't seen housing in the unincorporated areas. And that's really the problem here.
Yes, we're right. So we defeated this ballot measure, and that was good work by all of us, for-profit developers, nonprofit developers. We had Democrats supporting us, Republicans supporting us, the voters obviously supported us. But then, Gary, the government, the regulations at the San Diego County level make it all but impossible to build new housing, whether it's affordable, high-end, middle income. It's almost impossible to build housing in the unincorporated areas of the county where there's land. But they've layered so many restrictions that I just had lunch yesterday with Rita Mahoney. She's the incoming board chair for the Building Industry Association. And Rita made a point of saying how pleased she is with the city of San Diego because they're open for business. And
Yeah.
everywhere you see Mayor Gloria, he talks about, we want to build more homes. They've made policy changes. They're making it easier to build homes, especially the middle income homes and the affordable homes that this region so desperately needs. But she said almost in the same breath that, she sure wishes that the county of San Diego would follow the city of San Diego's lead.
Well, this is the core problem in our region. This is frankly my agenda for bringing this up in this conversation, is that most of the work that we've done since then has been in the incorporated city of San Diego or other incorporated areas where they have embraced infill and housing and so forth. But the numbers just don't add up. The city of San Diego, ironically, accommodated most of the housing development over the last century that to respond to growth in demand and employment, and they've run out of land within the incorporated areas. So the name of the game is in the unincorporated areas, but none of the action is there. I stood in front of the dais a few years ago representing some clients in front of the county board of supervisors who approved a total of around 10,000 housing units. And with the exception of a few housing units in Otay Mesa, none of those housing projects have been built because of sort of the state and local obstacles that continue to oppress the housing industry in this region.
It's tough.
And so the point is that you can do all these infill projects that the city of San Diego and other cities have allowed and have welcomed, and I applaud everything they've done. I totally agree with you with respect to the efforts on the part of the mayor and the previous mayor and the city administration. They've all been really supportive of housing, but you add up all those units and they don't come to anything near the demand for units or the right type of units that we need in San Diego County, which is family housing. This goes back to your kids. They're going to be fine in their 20s, but when they get into their 30s and 40s and they raise families, that's when these people are exiting out of San Diego County beginning now. And that's what's informing these forecasts. And that's a very negative thing. And the county has to get into the game. And yet we're not seeing any action on the county's part or recognition on the county's part at all. Now, I will tell you that I have talked to your former employer, Kevin Faulkner, who's running for board of supervisors, in detail about this. And we've had comprehensive discussions recently about this. And he's committed to changing that, but he's one vote. But the board of supervisors has to get in the game, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. The land in the county is very underutilized. It's overregulated. But also, Gary, I think we need to rethink how we think about housing, right? We can't just think about this infill. You're right. It's never going to get us where we need to go. We need to start looking at ADUs, but not just ADUs, but Ricardo Flores over at List San Diego has this really interesting idea where, why don't we allow people to subdivide their land so we can build some duplexes?
Density is what you're talking about. Yeah.
Right.
In other words,
because although there's land in the unincorporated areas of the county, we're pretty landlocked in the city, right? And so we need to be innovative with
everywhere.
These
He's right, you're right, and this is the bandwagon that I've been on with my clients, and I would say that even I've done my company, certain Nathan Motor and myself have done the feasibility studies. I think on all portions at least of all of the master plan communities in San Diego County over the past 30 years. Or more. And I would go as far as to say, if we had an opportunity to work on another master plan in the unincorporated area, it would look nothing like the master plans that we've done historically. It would be highly more dense. There would be employment opportunities at this site.
I mean, Gary, right now,
it wouldn't impact the traffic like it did. We need the policymakers to step up to the table and give us a chance, and we need the voters to give us a chance to allow that to happen. Can you make that happen, Tony?
Let's get together and put a team together and go do it. One thing that you asked earlier, like what's changed or what concerns me. is one of the things that I run up against, and you do too, are these competitions where 3 or 4 or 5 teams compete for the right to develop a piece of land, usually a public-private project. And I'm concerned that what's happening in some cases is it's not always the best team with the best plan that's getting selected. It's the team that has the lowest price point.
Don't get me started on this. This is a rabbit hole you don't want to walk down.
I mean, it's sort of like you and I when we bid on services with potential clients, right? I mean, we're honest brokers. I don't tell somebody it's going to cost $3,000 if it's going to cost 10, you know? I don't, you know what I mean? And so that's another layer of complexity that I think we're up against, and why we're not seeing some of the development that we should have been seeing by now.
So we're seeing a lot more complexity. That's really one of the changes. To my earlier question, what's changed? It's really, things are really more complex. They're not less complex.
Yeah.
One last sort of question on in that regard. You have relationships with electeds, with city council people, mayors, and so forth. How do you approach them? How do you differentiate your messages to them versus to the community as a whole when you visit with them and you do your work on behalf of clients?
I will say sort of generally that the city council, the mayor, the supervisors, even though I think, those regulations really bother me, they're, for the most part, I think these are good people. They're good leaders. They all want the same thing, right? They all want to solve this homelessness and this housing crisis. So that's good for you and I, right? Because these issues are already top of mind for them. These folks are approachable. They want what's best for San Diego. So they're willing to listen. They're willing to talk. And they're honest. If you have an idea, or if a client has an idea, and for one reason or the another, it's just probably not going to fly.
Yeah.
You'll hear that feedback pretty early on, so you can pivot and
Do they? Yeah, I share your sort of worldview of certainly our local electives. I don't share that with respect to all of our national electives.
yeah.
But I think that that people, first of all, I admire people that want to go into public service. I think it's really hard to do, and it's very stressful, and it's a tough way to make a living or to promote your life or a career. And so
Yeah.
I admire them all, regardless of whether I agree with any of them, because I don't think anybody comes in with a negative agenda. I think they all want a betterment of the city. I think they genuinely listen, but they're under a lot of pressure from their constituency, because they got to get reelected. I think the real problem is short-term versus long-term. We're in a business of that goes at a snail's pace, and we have to get politicians to think long-term. But in terms of
It's hard because they got to get reelected.
Yeah, they got to get reelected every 2 or 4 or 6 years, and that's really always the conundrum with respect.
Yeah, and it is a thankless job in a lot of ways, and they work long hours, and they're getting asked for things all the time. Can you imagine how many asks there probably? So people like you and I we just want to be smart and thoughtful and with our asks.
Yeah.
But for the most part, yeah, I think they're all good people, and they all want the same thing,
I don't want to finish this conversation without mentioning the fact that you've got a very interesting podcast that you've been doing. Why don't you tell us about that?
Oh, thank you very much. My podcast page, Dear San Diego, and for those of you listening, it's the URL isn't Dear San Diego. We're produced by Olas Media, so the link would be Olas Media, OLASmedia.com/shows/Dear San Diego, DEAR-SAN-DIEGO. Gary's got it up here on the screen. Thank you, Gary. It is a public affairs podcast with personality. What does that mean? So we interview a newsmaker on the show when we do record a podcast. And we don't just, I'm a former journalist, but my co-host, Juan, is digital marketing whiz. So neither one of us are working journalists. So this isn't a straight news Q&A show. So while we do talk about the news of the day, public affairs podcast with personality, we really try and lean in, Gary, on who are these people? What makes them tick? How do they do everything they do, plus go home and put dinner on the table? What do they do in their spare time? And so we really trying to let listeners know who are these thought leaders, who are these newsmakers, who are they away from the office, and the anecdotes they share about their daughter in Brooklyn or about playing virtual video games with their grandson in Utah. Those are the stories that are most interesting in these podcasts. So yeah, when you can, check it out, Dear San Diego, and you can also find Dear San Diego obviously on Spotify and Apple and all that other stuff.
It's really cool. And I know I'm way down on your list somewhere to interview, right?
You're not way down on our list. You're a newsmaker. Talk about somebody who's got a great media profile. You are right up there, my friend.
Bribery works really well. So Tony, thanks again for doing this. I'll look forward to many years of working with you on all these things with my clients. You're the go-to guy, and I appreciate you doing this.
Thanks, Gary. I really enjoyed being on. It's always a pleasure talking to you, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, Tony.